None? Okay. The action items we have today is to approve the August 21st and October 23rd, 2024 minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion. Second, whichever you want.
Motion and a
Me to me.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay. Informational items. Our presentation this morning is on the community bus plan. Jacob Labutka, PSTA's planning manager, will summarize the recommendations of the plan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, returning and new committee and board members. My name is Jacob Labutka. I am the planning manager here at PSTA, and today I'm going to provide what is the sequel to last month's presentation from our Planning Community Affairs Officer, Darden Rice, where she talked about the strategy behind the community bus plan and some upcoming milestones. So today I'm very excited to unveil what we're calling our Connected Community Bus Network, how we're branding these series of recommendations that we're wanting to, that we've it's been about the work of about a year of public outreach, and that we will continue to do public outreach leading up to an anticipated board vote in March. And then, assuming approval, we would still continue to do outreach to the riding public in the community so they know about the changes that are being proposed today. So very excited to unveil this to you all today. So a few things right off the bat I would like to frame this conversation and presentation with. So first off, all of the recommendations that I will be showing you today, the draft recommendations, which I'll also say none of this will move forward without lots of discussion and approval by the board and the committee in March. But all of the recommendations presented today are cost neutral. So this is totally within our existing budget and does not require any additional budget as presented here today. Another thing that's important to note is that this plan functions as a network. So we'd be proposing to, although we are proposing many changes, which I will go over, we are proposing to implement this as a system all at once, because many of these routes do go together, and we know that our riders utilize our system as a network, and there's certain concepts like time transfers that I'll go over later in the presentation that would rely on this being implemented at one time. And we're also branding this plan. We want this to be clear, consistent, and connected, both for our existing riders and hopefully some new riders. We want this to be clear in that our goal is to make the route schedules easier to understand for our existing and new riders. We want to be consistent by providing 7-day-a-week service across our system. Many of our routes currently do not operate on the weekends, but we know that our riders and the public in general have lives and work schedules beyond Monday through Friday. And so we'd like our recommendations to be responsive to that. And this is also a connected system, and so I'll describe how some of our route design and timing the options in this plan will improve the transfer experience for our riders. So shown here is a map of our existing network, and apologize that the yellow is making the color scheme seem a little weird. I might also invite you, if you would like a clearer view of the map, to also look into your board packet where there's a draft report that has a copy of all of the maps and charts shown here today. So I'll just walk through the color scheme shown on the screen here that will be utilized throughout this presentation and other maps and charts. So all routes shown in red, such as our Sunrunner, means that these are routes that are arriving with a frequency of every 15 minutes. Those routes in blue, such as our Route 79 that travels on 66th Street, those are routes that come every 30 minutes. Oh, I almost forgot the purple, which is kind of hard to tell purple on the screen. Routes in purple, such as our Route 60 on Gulf to Bay Boulevard, those are routes arriving every 20 minutes. Routes in green, such as our Route 62 on Belcher, arrive once an hour. The dashed routes are our limited services, particularly our express routes that go over to Tampa that maybe just have a few trips today, like 10 to 12 trips. And it's kind of hard to tell on the screen, but they're yellow. You'll see the circle around Safety Harbor. There's a yellow zone, which means that it is an on-demand service zone. And so with that, so this is officially the map of the draft recommendations that, like I said, have been the result over a year of public outreach and board conversations. So the goals listed here on the screen these are high-level tenets that are considerations going into this plan that have been the result of conversations with this group, with our Riders Advisory Committee, and the riding public. And So if I'm going to go over to high level, how we're being responsive to those conversations. There are a lot of details in this plan, and you may not notice at a high level much has changed, but there are some pretty significant changes in this plan. But I would certainly welcome you to look at the documents in your board packet and on the bus plan website that have a lot more information and detail on the plans here. At a high level, and I'm going to go through these a lot more, but this plan is going to be responsive to the fact that we have more weekend demand. Like I said, riders have lives and jobs 7 days a week. We know we're a tourist area, so we have recommendations that are responsive to that. We want to capitalize on our premium core routes and expand our core frequent services where possible. We want to increase access to opportunity and jobs, and hopefully as a result, increase ridership. We want to decrease travel time, something called time transfers that I'll get into. And of course, we want to be cost neutral. So first off, I'm going to go into how we're being responsive to shifting demand and resources to the weekends. So this is a lot to look at, so I'm going to explain this chart here for a moment so you can understand what you're looking at. So shown here on the left, this is a chart that shows our span of service and frequency by route. And the color scheme you see here is related to, is the same color scheme in the previous maps that shows routes by frequency. So the columns on the rows, the numbers on the left are the routes in our system, and the numbers on the top, or the columns, are each hour of the day as a service span, so you have the 12 o'clock hour, the 1 o'clock hour, and so on and so forth. So for example, the first route shown on this list is the Route 4. So the Route 4, one of our core routes, operates every 15 minutes for most of the day, but then it drops off to about every 30 minutes in the evening. So one way that we're being responsive to increasing the span of service on weekdays to start, so you'll notice in the chart on the left, the black box that's shown here shows our service hours at 8 p.m. or later. So one of the things we hear from riders a lot is that my bus doesn't run late enough, it stops too early. And you'll notice for many of our routes, that is the case, that many routes don't operate past 7 or 8 p.m. or earlier. And sometimes for many of our routes, only the core routes, like our routes 4 and 34 on 34th Street, are the only ones to operate a little later. So the next chart to the right of that, same scheme, but same organization, but you'll notice that in that black box, that the bars go further, stretch further out, which means that we have a longer span of service across all of our routes. So through kind of the trade-offs of how we've allocated our resources, we've tried to make our services run later across our system to be more consistent. The charts on the right, same organization there, so it shows our existing services on Sunday. So you'll notice a lot of gaps in service, which is why there's a lot of white in the chart, which means those routes are not operating on Sundays. You'll see to the right of that chart what the draft plan looks like on Sundays, and you'll see a lot less white in there, which means that all of these routes are operating on Sundays to have that consistent service 7 days a week. So another way to visualize this that might be a little more digestible is our map showing how we operate.
Can you go back for a
Oh,
second?
of course.
That's a little fast.
Yes, no, absolutely. I know definitely a lot to take in. If you have any particular questions about this chart, happy to answer
When you
that.
say white, exactly what are you?
Oh, so like, for example, you see like here on the 58, it's just, I should have said blank, honestly.
Okay.
So it's just
Thank
blank,
you.
which means we don't operate service there. So thank you for asking that clarifying question. But yeah, and like I said, it's definitely a lot to take in. So another way we can visualize this is our map showing our route network at different times of day and days of the week. So shown here, the map on the left is our system map, our services as they operate at 8 p.m. on weekdays. So you can see a decent number of routes on the map, but there are some areas that are notably do not have service at 8 p.m., such as some parts of central Pinellas County and Pinellas Park and Largo, and places like Oldsmar, for example, that do not have service into the evening hours. The map on the right shows how our routes would operate under the draft plan at 8 p.m. So you'll see those gaps identified are filled in, and pretty much for the majority of our system would still continue to operate into the evening hours, which is not the case today. And that's those same maps except on Sundays. The map on the left shows our routes as they operate on Sundays, but again, you'll see those same service gaps. And you'll notice how the draft plan map on the right attempts to fill in those gaps. So So like I said, the goal here is to increase the span of service to the extent possible and to have more consistent service so we can be responsive to our riders' needs who don't just have a Monday through Friday schedule. We also know that we are a pretty significant tourist area, and we have a lot of tourists that come in who are oftentimes more willing to pay a premium fare. So we have a suite of services and initiatives that we're going to be planning over the next year, some of which will have that higher fare. So for example, I'm sure many of you heard about the ferry services that we are planning to launch sometime early next year, connecting Clearwater and eventually Dunedin once the docks are repaired in Dunedin. And we're also looking to restructure trolley services out on Clearwater Beach so they operate more frequently, which I'll get into later in the presentation. Next up, the Cross Bay Ferry. We've also had conversations about PSTA managing the Cross Bay Ferry services similar to the Clearwater Ferry services, so we'll be looking to do that sometime next year. We're also working to enhance our Sunrunner service with an added stop near the St. Pete Pier, which should be unveiled early next year. I will say, if you're in downtown St. Pete, if you have an opportunity to walk by that station, which is on First Avenue North by First Street area, it's really just interesting seeing what I like to call the guts of a station. It's really interesting look just to see what it takes to put that together. Fourth, and for those of you that are in the Finance Committee meeting, you heard about this from Bonnie, we're planning a shuttle service to connect St. Pete Clearwater International Airport with Clearwater Beach destinations. And lastly, and this is certainly a longer-term initiative, but following the completion of the Howard Franklin Express lanes, we're going to try to work with partners to identify how we could do a premium service between downtown St. Pete. We really want to, this is I think the way for us to incrementally expand the backbone of our system and increase the frequency of routes throughout our service area. Next up, and analyzing the impacts of these changes, we want to make sure that we are, to the extent possible, increasing access to opportunity, and hopefully as a result, increasing ridership. And a way that we can measure that is the number of jobs that an individual can access on public transportation. So this is what this graph shows. So we show this for the average resident. This shows how many jobs they can reach within an hour travel time. And so we show this for our existing network in gray and our draft network in orange. And we show this both for the average resident on the left. We also show this for populations who are more likely to use transit than the average resident, including residents of color, low-income residents, and households without cars. So focusing on the average resident columns for a moment, so this is how many jobs you can access at 8 p.m. on a weekday, on weekdays. So again, we're wanting to increase the availability of transit into the evening and weekend hours for folks. So today, the average resident can reach just over 25,000 jobs on transit within an hour. So, and under this draft plan, that would increase by about 24%. So pretty significant increase in job access into the evening hour, because we know many of our riders and the public in general have jobs beyond that typical 9 to 5 office hours. And the increase is even more pronounced for residents of color and households without cars that see increase in job access of 26 and 27% respectively. We also did the same analysis for travel time on Sundays. So this shows the number of jobs where residents can access on Sundays. So you'll notice that the number of jobs did decrease from the previous chart, which is primarily a function of the fact that services do tend to operate less frequently on Sundays. However, if you're like this, within a similar window of time, to where you have buses arriving at a terminal like Park Street Terminal and giving riders about 5 to 10 minutes to transfer between routes, and then all of those buses would leave that terminal at approximately the same time. So you'll notice here that this trip might take about 80 minutes for this rider, but with time transfer, they could see a savings of 20 to 25 minutes off of their travel time, which is pretty significant, because we do hear from many of our riders about the problem of misconnections or my trip taking a while. So this is one way that we can work to improve that at select locations. So I know I've covered a lot, but we hope the goal of this plan is to significantly improve and be responsive to ways that we can enhance public transit here in Pinellas County. But like I mentioned before, this is a cost-neutral plan. So you can't get something without taking it from somewhere else. So I do want to explain how we're paying for the increase in span of services on the weekends and the weekdays and what the trade-off is here. So the most of the funding allocation from this comes from two buckets, if you will. So the first bucket is on some of our routes, we have different frequencies at different times of day. For example, Route 18 along Alternate 19 or Route 34 along 34th Street have slightly more service during the peak hours than the rest of the day. So something we're doing on those routes is we're just going to have a flat, consistent 30-minute frequency throughout the day. So that does free up some resources for some of those improvements I mentioned. And in addition, we do have a limited express service called the 52LX that travels along 49th Street and Bay Drive. So there would no longer be a peak-specific limited express trip, but those riders would still be served by the local services, and there would be a lot more frequency on Bay Drive. Since I mentioned earlier, we'd be offering 15-minute frequency within that corridor. The second bucket are on certain routes, we want to make sure that through this plan, we are matching the demand and the ridership of routes with how much service is allocated to that route. So we have a few routes that we are dialing back the frequency on somewhat, but still increasing span of service. So we are decreasing the frequency on 3 routes. The Route 23 that travels along 22nd Avenue South, primarily in St. Pete. The Route 59 that travels along Almerton in the kind of Largo Central Pinellas area. And the Route 74 that travels on Park Boulevard through Pinellas Park. So again, there'll still be service available in all of these corridors. We are just slightly reducing the frequency on these to pay for the increase in span of service on weekdays and on weekends. So some of you may recognize this slide from Darren's presentation last month, but I really want to emphasize that this is a conversation and community engagement driven plan. We've done a lot of engagement over the last year with this board and committees and the community to get to this point, and we'll continue to do that over the next few months. I'm actually excited to announce that right after this meeting will be the official launch of the third and final phase of engagement for the Connected Community Bus Network, where we'll be doing a countywide survey, we'll be going out to transit centers, different community events, and doing a lot of digital engagement to make sure that the riding public and the broader community, that we hear their comments on this plan. So this comment period is going to go until about the beginning of January, and then our consultant team, Jarrett Walker and Associates, will incorporate comments from the community into revising those draft recommendations you saw, and then we'll have the appropriate public hearings in February, and then bring this to a vote to the board in March. Because like I said, none of this moves ahead without your approval. And pending approval in March, we would still continue to do significant community engagement through workshops and other initiatives in those 6 months to make sure that our riders know about the changes in this plan and are prepared for it. And with a goal implementation date of next October. So I will stop there. Happy to take any questions, comments, or if you have any recommendations for public outreach opportunities, happy to take that as well. And I see a hand up over here.
Yes, question. You said 22nd Avenue. What is the frequency now?
It is, that is the Route 23. It currently comes every 30 minutes. So under this plan, it would now come every 60 minutes.
Okay. I guess because I travel that route every day and I see every bus stop on 22nd Avenue being utilized.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to figure out how that's going to impact those riders, because I see it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I do know there are definitely some riders within that corridor. So when we were looking at, this trade-off conversation, we were looking at trying to find areas where it may still have some ridership, but for the level of service on a route like that runs every 30 minutes, while it does have some, it doesn't have as much as others, say like the 79, for example. But that being said, there will certainly be an impact. So something I should have mentioned is that we do want to give special attention to this during the engagement period, so we can get feedback on that as well.
Okay, and because I also know that the frequency is not the same on 18th or 26th. So that's quite a bit of distance for them to walk from 22nd Avenue. So I'm going to continue to be an advocate for 22nd Avenue because I know how busy that particular route is, and I know how lack of service we have on the 2 main corridors, north and south of 22nd Avenue.
No, absolutely. And I think something we can do in addition to the outreach on this is we can take a deeper dive into the ridership of that corridor and just to double check that, the recommendations here are reflective and responsive to whenever the ridership may be there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
How do you, you say cost neutral,
Yes.
so how do you, I use the word monetize. How do you monetize these changes in order to actually ascertain
Yeah.
if it's cost neutral?
Yeah. No, that's a really great question. So when working with our consultant on this project, so we monetize it by the number of service hours. So
Who
we
is your,
know
who is your consultant?
A company called Jarrett Walker and Associates.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
The
And
bus
so-
study company.
Exactly. So we basically worked with them in our scheduling department to say, in our budget and in, forecasted to future years, how many service hours can we operate within our existing budget? So we basically gave them that parameter, which is sort of shown by these blocks, if you will. So like we only have so many of these blocks we can play around with. So basically we, through the service hours that we gave them, they stuck within the parameters of, we have X number of service hours, and this equals that number that we gave them, to make sure that we were within
But
budget.
does that then translate into buses and drivers?
No,
And assets,
yeah.
in other words?
Yes.
Assets and the cost of
Absolutely, so it
assets.
stays within our existing fleet, so anything that we're recommending here isn't gonna require like additional bus purchases, for example.
So that would be those, I'll use the word hours, or man hours, bus hours, they're being simply re-employed
Exactly,
in these other directions.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things obviously about transit is to increase frequency on a route, especially in the peak period. You need more buses.
Right.
You need to buy more buses. Increasing just how long the buses run at night, or especially on the weekends when we have tons of buses sitting around here, you don't need to buy any more buses. We can just these recommendations are largely they're within our existing fleet
Yes.
size. I mean, the number of buses, because they're just expanding how long they run out there, but it's the same bus.
Mhm.
The cost is in the driver. It is in paying the driver
Yeah.
largely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Jacob, on your timetable here, it looks like you're gonna be, at the end of January, basically, would be the end of the community outreach, and then you'd go into February 25 would be the public hearing on changes, because I'm sure there'll be some changes to this.
Yes. No, absolutely. So the outreach period will be probably through the first week of January, because it will take a few weeks for our PSTA team, the consultant team, to incorporate the changes from the outreach period into the plan, and then that way we'll be ready for both February hearings and taking this back for a March vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a good plan, so looking forward to seeing how it all,
Absolutely.
shakes out, so.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so is this a result of the bus study, the community bus study?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is a result of all of the quantification, the community bus study? I thought the community bus study was kind of going through this year.
So the community bus plan officially started in spring of last year. So it started with, and we're federally required to do an onboard survey, just so we have a statistical profile of our ridership. If you're actually interested in learning more about that, on our website link, which I'll make sure is distributed to everybody, we've uploaded a report that shows even route by route what the demographic makeup of our ridership is. So we
Okay.
started with that, and then we officially started the outreach period for the bus plan about a year ago, last November,
Okay.
where we had multiple phases of engagement to get to the place here where we can show draft recommendations.
Yeah. I would say that what Jacob is presenting today is sort of the consultant recommendations
Right.
after the
Right.
of the bus plan.
Of the bus plan,
Of the
yeah.
bus plan. And then it is based on, like he said, survey data and quantitative analysis and the public input.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we're going to go through and kind of present this to the public and get their reaction
Exactly.
before.
Now, did the bus plan, did they recommend vehicles?
They, oh, you mean vehicle types? I think they didn't necessarily recommend specific vehicles. I think they were mainly just focused on making sure that we stayed within budget, within our existing fleet assets.
Fleet. Okay. Because I know back in 14,
Yeah.
they recommended, and I brought this up at the last meeting, the smaller buses on the connecting
Yep.
routes.
Yes, and your point was well taken that you made, and so certainly I think once we kind of go out to the public, get a sense of the alignment of these routes, yeah, then we'll definitely have to look at the ridership levels that we can, project to order or right size or the size of the buses
Mhm.
that we order in the future.
I'm very interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Jacob.
Great, thank you.
All right, our final presentation is by Devin Deal, PSTA's Data Analysis Manager on ridership and fare collection trends. Devin?
Good morning, Planning Committee. My name is Devin Deal, Planning and Data Analyst Manager. To our new board and committee member, Commissioner Hazelton, welcome. This presentation kind of flip-flops between Planning and Finance Committee based on where there's time in the committee, and we use this as an opportunity to highlight some of our ridership trends or statistics for the previous months, as well as to address any topics or conversation at board meetings and committee meetings. So if there's anything specific in the future, ridership related, you would like to see a presentation on, I'd be happy to put that together. So for this month, I'm going over our fiscal year 24 ridership. Bear with me on the colors, if you could refer to your board packet for the colors. So fiscal year 24 ridership you see in red. Fiscal year 23 is the line very close to the red line in blue. And then fiscal year 22 is in green at the bottom. So for fiscal year 24, we did see an impact in October and December whenever we charged fares in the summer, and then we also had service reductions in December. So our ridership for fiscal year 24 was kind of lagging behind fiscal year 23 going through to the beginning of the year. In January, we took over the Vanpool program, and that really supplemented our ridership overall. So that's where you can see, starting in February, we surpassed fiscal year 23, and they continued that throughout the year until September. You also see that real spring break peak, the seasonality in our ridership, where especially along the beaches and things like that, we see a really large increase during spring break. You see at the end of the fiscal year here where there was a large drop from August to September. We attribute that to Hurricane Helene, all of the flooding on the beaches where we had service shut down for several days as well as reduced on the beaches for over a week after that storm. We did end fiscal year 24 though with 2% higher ridership than fiscal year 23. So on the right, you can see we had about 10.7 million rides in fiscal year 24 compared to just under 10.5 million in fiscal year 23. The largest portion of what we do is obviously our fixed route bus services. That is the blue bar that you see right here. As I mentioned, we did have a service reduction, and so we saw a decrease in fixed route ridership for the fiscal year. It went down about 2%. However, the rest of our services all saw increases. The red bar that you see here, that is our Jolly Trolley and Looper contracted bus services. Those saw about a 5% increase in ridership going from fiscal year 23 to 24. You see this, that's supposed to be a green bar, it's kind of blue, but that's our Vanpool ridership that you see added in to really supplement our overall fiscal year 24 ridership.
What's the number of that? Do we know?
Vanpool was about 350,000, and the trolley partners was about 430,000. And then our mobility services, the gray box up top, that went up about 22% from 500 to 600,000 rides roughly. And that is our PSTA Access, paratransit services, our Uber and Lyft partnerships, transportation disadvantaged access and things like that. So moving on to who is riding our buses and how they're paying. The large circle that you see in the center is a breakdown of ridership by fare type. Roughly 58% of our trips on our fixed route services were paid for with Flamingo fares, and the other 42% were either cash or UPass rides. To break those down a little bit further, of the Flamingo trips, I'm going to refer to the colors here. So of the Flamingo trips, about 41% of them took place through the app, which means you can load $5 into the app or cash into the app, and then you scan that at the point of sale when you're boarding the bus. 23% of those were Flamingo cards. That can be riders purchasing a day pass or a month pass. It can be our transportation disadvantaged riders, our Veterans Pass riders scanning that pass as they board the bus. And And then the remaining 36% was our contactless payments, and that is riders paying with their credit card tap to pay. That is using your Apple Wallet, your watch when you get on the bus. Those made up about 36% of our Flamingo rides. For the other rides, we had about 74% of that 42%, those further break down, and we had about 74% of those riders paid cash when they boarded the bus. And then about 26% of the remaining rides were UPass rides with our UPass partners. And so to dig a little deeper into our Flamingo fare accounts and who was riding and how they were paying, this captures the number of unique Flamingo accounts that were used to pay in fiscal year 24. This isn't rides, this is number of accounts. So the top way that our riders paid fares with Flamingo fares was the contactless full fare payment, that $225 fare. I'm boarding the bus and I'm tapping my credit card, I'm tapping my Apple Watch, and I'm paying $225 as I get on the bus. We had 63,419 riders, unique credit cards scanned, unique accounts scanned for our number one payment method. Next was Day Pass with about 40,000 Day Passes scanned. And then following that is our adult regular fare. That is, again, someone loading $225 into the app or $5 into the app. They ride the bus, they tap. We had 22,000 unique accounts. Next you'll see in, it should be pink, but it's orange. I'll call it orange. In orange, you see the riders that had to register with PSTA. They receive a reduced or a discount fare. That is our transportation disadvantaged riders, our Veterans Pass, our seniors. We had around 15,000 unique riders register with PSTA for our discount programs. And then outside of that, we have our one ride passes that we partner with places like St. Anthony's Hospital, St. Vincent de Paul, who will provide their clients with these single ride passes to get to and from appointments or other life-sustaining treatment. We have our group pass, and then everything outside of the top 10 was just grouped in all other Flamingo, that 3,500 rides. 3,500 accounts. But overall, we had 156,000 unique Flamingo accounts used in fiscal year 24. And again, Flamingo only makes up about 58% of our overall ridership.
Does any of that include the TransDub?
TransDep, no, this is primarily our fixed route services, how people are scanning and paying for our fixed route buses. And so for fiscal year 24, for our UPass rides, we increased over 150% from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24. We went from around 350,000 total UPass rides in fiscal year 23 to 847,000 in fiscal year 24. Our largest partner by far for our UPass rides is Pinellas County Schools. Those rides make up 51% of our overall UPass rides. We had 442,000 Pinellas County school rides on our fixed route buses this fiscal year. The second largest group of riders on our UPass programs was USF and St. Pete College. That's the 221,000 rides in the bottom right, or roughly 25%. The next largest group is our hotel UPass partners, which I think you guys talked about a little bit at the Finance Committee meeting. They had 160,000 rides in fiscal year 24, roughly 20% of our UPass rides. And then we have a few other partners that make up smaller percentages between the City of St. Petersburg, HCA Florida, and then smaller partners in our UPass programs. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Hazelden, to your point about looking at smaller buses after you made that comment, I did ask Devin for a future deep dive look into our routes and what routes might warrant smaller buses. So hopefully he'll have a beautiful, colorful PowerPoint sometime soon about that.
Maybe better colors.
Yeah. Better screen.
Screen.
Yeah.
Or tech equipment,
I guess he said January, we're gonna have a new screen.
January.
A new
projector.
projector. Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Does any committee member have any other business to bring before the committee? Okay, our next meeting is January 22nd at 10:30. And,
Happy holidays. Happy holidays.
Yes.
This committee.
happy holidays. This meeting's adjourned.
See anybody still there?
But then we'll be done.
I mean, that's,
Yes.